It's a single-page document designed to replace 90 pages, 100 pages, 300 pages of waste.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Mars Discovery District and welcome to Entrepreneurship 101. You are joining us for our lecture on the business model canvas, and you are joined not just by the person next to you in the room, but also by our online participants, our webcast participants, including our satellite center partners who are all over Ontario and in some cases outside of Ontario. So a warm welcome to them as well. So Mark Zimmerman is the Chief Technology Officer here at Mars Discovery District, and he's been working in the ICT space for more than 15 years. He has worked with both large companies as well as startups, and some of the large companies involve AT&T. He was Director for Product Management there, but he's also worked with Netcom Canada in business services. And from the looks of it, he has run a couple companies as well. So I'll let Mark take some time to speak to you about some of the deeper detail in terms of what his background is. I get to work with him on a regular basis and bother him quite a bit because he manages the comms and web team, and my team works very closely with them. So please take 30 seconds to a minute to introduce yourself to someone next to you and join me in welcoming Mark to the stage.
I'm going to talk to you today about something called the Business Model Canvas. It is a tool that I am a huge fan of. It's a single-page document designed to replace 90 pages, 100 pages, 300 pages of waste. And the number one thing that you have going for you as an entrepreneur is nimbleness, is speed, is sort of your agility. And this is a document that I think increases your agility. Traditional business plan, just to date myself kind of a little bit, that 905 King Street is 1999, 98, 99. Dilbert is sort of followed that sequence of events in the startup world, and this is one that stands out for me a little bit. As requested, I wrote the business plan to show profitability in year 3. Key revenue assumption is that an armored car crashes through that wall and spills its contents. And don't stand where the comet is assumed to strike oil. Business plan, in my experience generally, how many of you have been to business school, the MBA school, any kind of business education? You all wrote business plans or entered business plan competitions likely in that process. And typically what's in a business plan, at least sort of the MBA style business plan, is a guess times a wild guess times an assumption times about like this. And it's a collection of those things in a large document, and it becomes immovable, right? When you've written it and you've put all the time and you've figured out the headings, you've made this gigantic document, you've modeled it in Excel. The last thing you want to do is make a change to that thing, right? Sort of, hey, wait a second, I went out in the world, I tested one of these assumptions, and I found that it was wrong, or that, I thought it was 10 and it turned out to be 20. You never touch that document again, right? It's just got its own natural resistance to change. You even deny that the data in it is wrong so that you don't have to go about changing it. Business Model Canvas is, I hope, the exact opposite of that for you. Because I believe fundamentally that as an entrepreneur, it's the speed through that loop, the ideas code or the ideas product data loop, or ideas product learning loop, that is your number one advantage as an entrepreneur versus all of the various challenges that you face. All the competitive companies, all the incumbents that you're looking to overtake, all the challenges that you face as an innovator. The number one advantage you have is that you can go through that loop faster than the competition. And anything that slows down that process of learning is dangerous to you as an entrepreneur. So this is a tool that I think helps you go fast through that process. I'm going to walk you through this document. I'm going to walk you through each of the 9 boxes on this page in a little more detail. But this is the whole canvas. This one page is designed to replace all of that thing over there, all your 90 kind of things. The only other thing you need besides this canvas, ultimately, if done well, in terms of a business plan, is the spreadsheet. There's no escaping the fact that ultimately, the reason we're doing this 9 times out of 10 is to make this, is to make money, and we need to model the size of the money. But all the other parts of a business plan ultimately are waste to me for entrepreneurs. And this is a better answer to those questions. So I'm going to walk you through each of those boxes, why I think they're important, what you might put in them. How many of you have seen this before? The first time I did this was, I guess, 3-4 years ago. We presented this thing, and hardly anyone had seen one of these. You've now all hopefully seen one of these. How many of you have done one? Awesome. Hopefully, how many of you found it useful? Fantastic. So hopefully I'm preaching to the choir a little bit in terms of this, this tool, and hopefully you'll find some new things. But for those of you who have used the tool before, hopefully this is a refresher for you. It starts with, all businesses start, a fellow another fellow I'm a very big fan of is a gentleman named Ash Maurya. And he says that the job of a startup is to be a factory for creating happy customers, right? That ultimately the purpose of a business is to create a happy customer. All the other things are byproducts of creating a happy customer. And so if we start with who that customer is, that to me is generally the right place to begin filling out a canvas. There's no correct answer to this. You can start in other places on that continuum. If you have a product already, you can start in the value proposition box. If you think your unique differentiation is because you have access to a partner that nobody else has, you can start on the partner part of this. But I think if you haven't started one, this is the easiest place to start. To start with who the customer is that you are ultimately looking to delight. Who is it that you're going to make happy so that they are willing to part with some of their hard-earned money and give it to you. So what we're looking for here is a couple of things. We're looking for the particular customers. So, how many of you have done archetypes or know what I mean if we say, we want to sort of pick a customer persona is another way to think about this. So, one of the ways to fill this out is to sort of write in here that Judy is my prototypical customer, and she has the following characteristics. And, these are her pain points. These are the things that she's looking for a product to solve. Another way to write in here is the kind of companies, if you're in the B2B space, to write in, that these, my product is for distributors. I'm going to make their lives easier, or for transport companies. And these need to be addressable segments. This is not all consumers. That's not actionable. It doesn't help you. Your product may ultimately, assuming great success and that it all lines up perfectly, be used by everybody in the world. What we're caring about here at the start of this process is the initial segments. The ones that we're going to have, that we're going to design the product for in the early stages when we're really not sure whether it's going to fly or not. Who are we going to take our idea, show it to them, and if they like it, we've checked this box that, hey, we validated the first step on the journey of de-risking your business model. So that's your customer segments. The next thing, and these two go together. They're intertwined. I mean, the whole thing ultimately is intertwined, all 9 boxes, but these two in particular have a symbiosis between them. It's what problems do you solve for them? One of the things that we tend to, as entrepreneurs, get very enamored of is our particular solution, right? I've got this idea. It's way better than all the other answers to this question, and we get enamored of the product itself. The product is not generally what the customer cares about. Customer cares about what the product does for them, right? What problem do you solve for whom is really what these things are about, less than sort of, what is the value proposition itself. So these two need to coexist, and they need to have symbiosis between them. They feed each other. It's what problem do you solve for this type of customer? What pain do you eliminate for them? What gains do they get out of using your product? And there's sort of 3 sets of questions in these boxes that are worth thinking about. And I think Nathan Monk, who I think if you were here for Nathan's lecture, mentioned Clayton Christensen's jobs to be done work. And one of the ways to think about this value proposition is what job are you doing for these customers? What are they hiring your product to do for them? So there's three ways to think about this, or 3 buckets in which to think about this. The gains that the customer gets from using your product, what job it does for her, and what pain it takes away. And they're worth thinking about through all three of those lenses as you think about the interplay between these two boxes. Great that you have a fantastic value proposition. Great that you've identified a customer segment. If you can't get the value proposition to the customer segment, we still don't have a business, right? We need a way to deliver that value to the customer. And channels typically, people tend to think of these purely as sales channels, and that's certainly an important way to think about this. You know, who is going to sell your product in the very, in sort of the simplest sense? What retail environment would I get the widgets that you've made? You know, where do I go to buy them? But equally important, how do customers find out about them? What are the marketing channels by which they know that the product's even available to be bought? And how are you going to deliver the product, not just in the physical delivery sense, but in the support afterwards, the things that come after the product, after sales support, the tech support that goes along with it. All of those kinds of things are part of how you deliver that value proposition ultimately to your organization. So how are you going to deliver the product? What kind of relationship is going to be established between you and the customer? And this is also important to think about from the customer's perspective. I hear a lot people say, that what I'm trying to do is have I want the customer to love my product. That's not an answer to this question. I mean, hopefully the customer will love your product. Would be a great thing, but that's not the relationship that they have with it. What we're asking for here is, how does the customer think about their business interaction with you? Is it a transactional one? Is it a one-time thing? Is it an ongoing relationship? Are they looking for simplicity? I don't really want to have, I don't have a relationship with my gas station, and I don't aspire to having a relationship with my gas station. I'm in and out. What I'm looking for there is simplicity. What I'm looking for there is convenience. What I'm looking for there is low friction in that relationship. So you need to think about this from the customer's point of view. What relationship do they aspire to, not what relationship do you aspire to having with them? And ultimately, those things turn into what Ajay was talking about, sort of how do you extract value from this process, right? How do you get paid for the various things for the value that you're delivering? And what is the nature of that payment? Is it one time? Is it ongoing? Is it a subscription model? Is it do you have a two-sided business model? You don't actually get paid by the customer at all. You get paid by a third party for access to the customer base that you have. And what's the scaling factor of that revenue stream? Does it grow linearly as you add users, or does it grow exponentially as you add users? Sort of what's the shape of the slope of that curve? You're gonna model that question, and you're gonna figure out the economics of it in Excel. That's the one thing that this does not do, the canvas for you. But the definition of that revenue stream, what the unit of measure is worth figuring out and putting in this document and testing it. Those things on the right are all the customer-facing parts of this equation. And so those five boxes rather let you tell half of the story of your business. And then we're going to tell the other half, right? These are all the things that you do for customers, and then on the other side of this equation, we have all the things that you have to do in order to deliver that value proposition. And we start with the key activities. And only list, and there's a reason, the shape of these boxes and the size of these boxes is deliberate. The reason this box is small is please don't list in here every activity that you're going to do. Yes, you are going to have office space. No, it doesn't go in here, right? It's not a key activity. It's not a value-creating activity. It's not something that matters to whether or not your value proposition is delivered to the customers who care about it. It's not essential. So these are the things that you must do in order to deliver the value to the customer, right? Just those essential activities, not all the activities of your business. So think hard about what you put in this box. prune this box. The fewer that are in there, the flip side of the agility advantage that you have as a startup is that you are resource constrained, right? You have fewer resources than all the other people that you are competing against almost always. Because almost always it's not the other startups that are the bad guys in this equation. It's the incumbents. It's the existing people who are successful in that industry, and they all have more resources than you. So key activities, the smallest list you can realistically come up with. And the next question is, what resources do you need to do those activities? The activities are one thing, and then what do you need to have in order to do them? Is it people? Is it a particular skill set? Is it access to a particular piece of technology? Is it a patent that you hold? Is it an algorithm that you created? What are the key resources that you have? And it's worth also in this box thinking about the defensibility of those resources. This is one of there are a number of areas on your business model canvas where you can think about the moat that you put around your business, about the defensive structure against competition and against alternate entrants in the market. And key resources is one of the very important places to think about that. What resources are uniquely mine, are uniquely my company's in this area that I can do either only we can do or that we can do better than anybody else, right? What resource do we have that is uniquely beneficial to this business? And then often, almost always in a startup case, but even in the largest companies, you need some other entity to execute against that value proposition, right? You need some other partner. You're building an Etsy business. You're going to sell products online through the Etsy marketplace. Etsy better be in that key partners bucket, right? Who are the essential parts of what you need to make the model work? You're building. We're gonna talk in a minute about a coffee business. You need coffee growers if you're going to execute against this. You need the people who make the beans if you're going to be in the coffee business, and they better be on your key partner list. You better have them in this area. But this is not again all the partners. Your accountant, highly important. You need her to make sure that the money flowing in and flowing out is on there, but doesn't show up in your key partners box, right? What shows up in your key partners box are the handful of organizations that are essential to your success and that are not readily interchangeable. I have an online business. My hosting company is important to me. It matters. But if they go away and I got to move from Rackspace to DreamHost, I'm sorry that I have to do that, but it's not going to kill my business, right? So it's not. They don't belong in this box. If I'd outsource the development of my application to Pivotal Labs, they belong in that box, right? So is that distinction clear? Does that sort of make some sense about sort of what falls in what box? Yeah. And ultimately, all of those things on the left have costs associated with them. None of those resources are free. None of those activities are free. None of those partners are likely, at least in a sustainable way, to be partners with you on an ongoing basis without some kind of value exchange. Not always pure cash here. You might find that your board members will work for equity. Some of your employees may do that. There's different currency that can be exchanged here, but value needs to be exchanged for all the things on the left of the curve. And so the combination of those things, that whole model there, gives you a complete business. There's nothing that a business does that is critical to its success or failure that you can't fit on this box, on this page. We can argue about the degree of the relative degree of importance to any given business model of any one of these boxes, right? There are businesses where being intimate with the customer and having deep knowledge about the segment is the key to success, right? And the success at customer segment and customer relationship and channel are the key to victory in that kind of business. There are businesses where being the most efficient, the most operationally excellent, the lowest cost, most repeatable, sort of all the, every widget is exactly the same, but I deliver them cheaper than everybody else, where those are the key things to success in the model. And they're all about excellence on the left side of this page. Increasingly in our sort of hyper-competitive, certainly in the online world, in the software world, and so on, excellence is required on both sides of that equation. The bar to success keeps getting raised for these kinds of things, and I got to be excellent at both sides of that equation. But there's nothing that a business does that doesn't fit on this canvas. Anyone think of anything that fits, that the business does that you couldn't map to one of these boxes? Awesome. So this is a useful model to me. One other thing to mention, one of the things that hasn't percolated through this model generally, but that we do a fair amount of here at Mars, is talking about businesses that have double bottom line, triple bottom line, that have social impacts as part of their equation. And it actually fits really well in this model to just put those things in as part of the cost structure. Treat them as part of the cost. Relabel that box instead of cost structure. These are the negative side of the ledger, if you will. And on the right-hand side, I've got the positive things, and we can equally measure the environmental outcomes of the business, the social outcomes of the business, and it's the same set of equations. It's those two boxes. Here's the amount of carbon in. Here's the amount of carbon out of those things. That works. Here's the amount of cash in. Here's the amount of social good out on the other end. The denominators are harder to come up with. We don't have a single currency to measure those things, but the exercise is equally useful to do for those two additional categories of things. And when you take this all together, I like to think of it as answering 4 kind of questions, right? On the right-hand side, we've got who is this business for? Who is it about? What is it about? The value proposition, the key activities, the customer relations, those are the whats of what this is. On the left, I've got the how. How am I doing these things? How am I delivering them? And of course, certainly in a venture kind of, in a startup, in a venture-backed startup, the why is the delta between the revenue streams and the cost discounted for risk and for time, right? It's that box minus this box is why I'm doing this ultimately. And so on a single page we get a view of these things. I did this. You see the sort of the shapes here. They're deliberately kind of rough and hand drawn, and that's because the most effective way I know how to do this is not with software. There are applications for doing this. You can get a piece. You can get some. You can get it online. There's web pages for doing it. There's all kinds of fancy templates. I would encourage you to do it with a whiteboard and a bunch of Post-it notes. What you're looking for is a way to think out loud when you're doing this, right? This is not meant to be a settled set of answers, at least not for any startup that I've ever been part of. This is, you put up here, this is our current hypothesis. This is what we guess our business looks like today. And then you go out into the world and you test those hypotheses and you come back and you say, oh, that sticky note, I wrote it up there like this. I was wrong about that one. I take that one down. I stick up the new sticky note. Here's what I think now, right? Here's my next guess about this thing. And I go out and test that guess in the world. All right, I was right about that one. I'm going to change it from a yellow sticky note to a green sticky note. And great, we're going to consider that question settled until we get some evidence that, that requires us to change it. But we're going to say, great, we got the segment nailed. Next part of the question, what is the next set of assumptions that I got to go out and test? Take those out, take them into the market, test them, come back, validate them, right? You want this to be as little resistance to changing and tweaking and modifying this as you possibly can. And you want it to be a living document, because one of the great values of this approach, entrepreneurship is almost always a team sport. How many of you, if you're working on a business, are single founders at this stage? Go find a co-founder, right? Highly correlated with entrepreneurial success. And so what you want to do is be able to put this document up and talk about it with your team. Even if you're the single founder, you've got somebody else in the team, you've got a friend, a colleague, somebody else who you bounce this idea about. The most useful part of this discussion of this document in the early stage of a startup is to stick it up there and to sit with someone and poke holes at it, right? And say, You think that's your customer segment? Is that really narrow enough? Can you address those people? Aren't they slightly different than this other segment? Shouldn't you redefine that a little bit? Is it really 18 to 45-year-olds, or is it 20 to 30s? Who are the sweet spot of the business that you're building? You say it's parents. Well, it's not parents of teenagers. It's parents of children under 10. Having those discussions and testing those assumptions and using this as a tool to measure learning about your business model, to me is where it's most useful. Once you got a reasonable subset of green stickies on that process, great. Make it into fancy PowerPoint deck. Make it pretty. Simplify it, clarify it, change the chicken scratch on the Post-it note into something that you've printed when you're pretty sure about that. But encourage you to do this as a living, breathing kind of exercise. Nothing beats Post-it notes and whiteboards for this from my perspective. I'm going to stop there for a sec. I want to walk you through a case study of a business modeled in the canvas. But before I do that, any questions about the model in the abstract, in theory? Yeah, please.
How does it help you solve problems?
I think there's two questions there. Let me make sure I've got them right. The first one is around if you have a business model that has some minimum amount of volume before it ignites, before it sort of tips. How do you model that in the canvas? And you can model the items that need to tip in the canvas. You can't model in the canvas, do I need 10% market share before this tips, or do I need 15%, or do I need 30, or do I need, what density, if you will, or what network effects, do I need before this becomes a viable model? I think you got to model that in numbers, right? Is the only, but I think you can model all the inputs and what they are and which ones are important. You can answer for yourself which one of those is the riskier set of assumptions in the canvas, right? Or you can define the question. You got to go out to answer the question by talking to customers, right? There's no other way around that. But you can record, hey, this is the question, and here's the experiments that I'm running to answer the question, right? And you can record that there. And then in terms of whether the segments are both partners and customers, in a lot of double-sided business models, that's absolutely the case. They're both partners and things. And typically the way I deal with that in the Post-it note world is do this twice. Do the model once for them as customers and once for them as users or as participants in the value stream, and do them in different colors. That's worked well for me with two-sided business models. Any other questions on sort of the theory before we go to kind of an example? Awesome. Let me walk you through who knows what those are? I already gave it away, but all right. They're Nespresso capsules. Back to, pardon?
This is mass production of garbage.
They are not the world's most environmentally friendly containers, for sure. So this is a business school favorite, kind of from, in terms of as a case study of a business. Those are the Nespresso capsules. This is what comes out of them. Mine never look quite that good, but anyway, that's what comes out of them. This is not a new invention. These things are invented in 1970. Took them a while to patent them. They patented them in 1976. I don't know what they did for 10 years between sort of patenting it and actually taking it to market. It doesn't seem that complicated, but it took 10 years to get them from, hey, we own the intellectual property around this thing, to we've now launched them in the market. The value proposition when they go to market with this thing in 1986 is for a fixed price, for $1 a cup. We're going to include the machine, we're going to include the capsules, we're going to include the service, we're going to include all of the elements. This is sort of buying coffee, sort of the way Boeing has done. Boeing has done this now with aircraft engines. They don't actually sell you an engine. They sell hours of time in the air to airline companies. They've wrapped all the things together and they say, all right, you pay $10,000 per hour flown. And we'll do everything else. And this is the coffee equivalent of that. They said, we'll supply the machine, we'll supply all the things, and you pay us $1 for every cup of coffee that comes out. Targeted at restaurants and offices. This was the market. Go to a restaurant, say, hey, you're making coffee. It's not your specialty. You're in the chicken business. Let us take care of the coffee, and we'll do this. Total failure. 2 years, they bang their heads against this wall. They sell almost none of them. They've got a huge investment in the plant, property, and equipment for making these things. It's not a very successful product. Nestle says, we're thinking really hard about shutting this down. In 1989, they put J.P. Gillard in charge of the thing as the commercial director of the Nespresso product. He does soup to nuts kind of assessment of the business. Says, here's what's working, what's not working. What are the things? No canvas yet, not invented, but thinks about the business model about this and says, hey, I'm going to make some changes here. And he pivots in the jargon now. Again, not what we called it then. He changes his mind. He changes the business model. We'd say now he pivoted. And he has one really essential idea, one change from the way that his predecessors had thought about this. He separates the machine from the coffee. He says these are actually two different value propositions. They're thought about two different ways. Think about them two different ways, and we'll have a better chance at doing this. So he says we're going to get out of the making of the machine business. We're going to outsource the making of the machines to third parties, initially to Philips and then to other companies, and say you make the gadgets. We're not good at this. We don't know how to do it well. You're going to manufacture the hardware for this. We also don't have a retail store. We don't have retail capacity. We don't have storefronts. All of our other products, the Nestle company, are sold through retail stores. They're sold in grocery. They're sold in other kind of places. We're not going to pretend to be the retail arm of this. We're going to sell it through retail stores, initially through sort of high street stores in Europe, through the Marks and Spencers and so on. Your manufacturers are also going to handle all the stocking and how many units and the forecasting and the risk associated with it. Did we get that right? Were there supposed to be 1,000 black ones and it turned out everybody wanted red and we got that wrong? We're not going to be in that business. That's going to be the manufacturer's part of this thing. Only part of the machine that we're going to remain responsible for is we are going to train the sales staff. We're going to go to all the retail stores and we're going to teach them how to make coffee because they're not good at that. They don't know how to do that. We're going to teach them how to make coffee and how to talk about coffee. So we're going to own the sales training part of that process, but it's going to be someone else's salesperson, right? So that's what's going to happen with the machine. All of that relatively not particularly novel, nothing new there. All the other coffee machines largely were sold that way. On the right-hand side is where the innovation comes in this process, particularly in 1989. Says, we're going to sell this stuff online and through the phone. We're going to make this so that you join the club. You cannot buy capsules from us in a store. We're going to give you some with your machine, right? The first batch we're going to send home with you gratis, included in the machine, take them with you. But for the rest of them, you got to order them from us initially on the phone, and then as Minitel and other ways in France kind of order this online. And ultimately, as the internet comes, you're going to order them, through digital channels. But you're going to be a member of a club. Sort of the word club defines what they were striving for in the value proposition here, right? And we're going to deliver these things direct to you at home. Initially 48 hours down to 24 hours now. We're going to deliver them to your home or office, and that's where you're going to get them. Don't buy them in a retail store. We're going to deliver them to you. So that's the change in the value proposition that they proposed. And as it matured, this evolved a little bit, right? So 1989, that's the value proposition. As they succeed in the market, they added things to this, right? They said, we're going to make our own breading machines. We're not actually going to make them ourselves, but we're going to contract with a contract manufacturer and say, hey, we're going to stick the Nespresso logo on a machine made by Philips, right? But it's going to be a Philips machine. Ultimately added their own retail boutiques. They have a couple of them in Toronto. There's sort of physical stores where you can go in, and they controlled all of that value proposition. And they ultimately went back at the office market with Nespresso Pro. But these are the sort of the fundamental changes that they made to the business model. And it turned out pretty well. In fact, it turned out extraordinarily well from a business point of view. 30% compound annual growth rate over 10 years. That is an extraordinary number. There are almost no businesses that I can think of that have a 30% CAGR over a 10-year period. First year as a startup, $0 to $1, easy to do 30% growth, right? From one to the next one, again, easy to do. 10 years in, you've got some really large numbers that you're growing 30% year on year as these things happen. So Compound annual growth rate extraordinary for this product. This number is out of date. I keep meaning to update it. 4 years ago when I did this, they were at a $3 billion annual run rate. They're well north of 4 now, and clicking along quite healthily in terms of this process. 12 million machines when I did these slides a couple of 3 years ago. 20 billion capsules. A staggering number of those that are in landfill and other things now in terms of that process. Available in 50-some countries, again, probably a larger number now than when I last updated this. And so a remarkable success in terms of the business things. And sorry, I got to click back through the animations again. So I'm gonna try to map their business, the successful version of the business, onto the canvas as hopefully object, lesson in how this tool works. So here's Nespresso on the canvas. The customer segments, at least at the beginning, high-end households. In fact, they probably have lots of other language about aspirational households, sort of, in terms of the sort of low-end luxury market that they were aiming for. The value proposition, whether this is achieved or not, the promise for sure is high-end restaurant quality espresso at home. That's the idea. And in fact, there's a great article in The Atlantic a couple of, maybe 6 months ago. They went to sort of Michelin star restaurants and counted how many of them use this as their coffee answer in the back, and they were stunned at the number of places that ultimately are using Nespresso in the back part of the back end of the coffee, because it's the most efficient, fastest way for them to do it the same every time, right? At a restaurant. So they likely they meet that piece. The customer relationship, the definition of that is member. They're not trying to sell you a one-time thing. They're trying to sell you an ongoing subscription relationship with them. And member is the definition that they would use to describe that relationship. The channels start with call centers, at the beginning of this process, ultimately morph to websites, to retail, and finally to their own, sort of delivery things to the Nespresso boutiques as this product evolves. How do they make money at this? This is a razors and razor blades kind of business model. They make a very small licensing fee on the piece of hardware through the manufacturers, but they make the bulk of the revenue. Most of that $3 billion comes from selling those capsules on an ongoing basis, and almost all of the margin comes from the selling of the capsules. What do you got to be good at? What are the key things that you have to do? What key resources do you have to win in this space? Well, they had to have a distribution network. You had to physically get these. You had to figure out logistically, how am I going to get these capsules to people's homes in 24 hours, 48 hours? How am I going to solve that problem? Because you can imagine the instant breaking of that member relationship if on Sunday morning there's no coffee. Right? If you're a coffee drinking kind of a household, and that you've bought into this as the coffee delivery method, and we have no coffee, really quick we're going to get a different kind of machine, right? If that isn't solved. So distribution, key to the success of this. They had the patents that gave them a moat around this business for a long time to build critical mass in it. And now that those patents have expired, have been worked around, you see the K-cups and the whole bunch of other answers, similar answers to this question. And they're trying now. They have a new product that spins the capsule to sort of argue for greater different, to try and recapture that patent-oriented moat, because they've got a patent on spinning the capsules. I'm not sure what it has to do with anything, but that is aspirationally what they're trying to do. You have to have the production plants. You have to have the scale to make these things. You have to make them at reasonable scale, and ultimately you have to have a brand that allows you to make that promise of, hey, I'm going to deliver a high-end product at a consumer price and deliver against that. What are the key activities that I have to engage in? I got to do a great job of marketing, first and foremost. This is largely a marketing story. Marketing execution was key to their success. I got to be pretty good at production. I got to be able to make these things consistently. I got to make billions of them. I got to be pretty good at that, and I got to handle the logistics, the delivery, and I'd say the logistics are probably the most essential one in this particular case. And then the key partners here, the coffee machine manufacturers, I had to convince somebody to make these gadgets on spec for me to do this. That was probably the most essential one in this model. And then ultimately, what drives the costs? Distribution and sales, marketing, manufacturing. These are the cost drivers of this. This with the Post-it notes is my best PowerPoint facsimile of what I hope you'll do with this thing on a whiteboard. You put those up, you'll say, hey, here's who I think it is. Go ahead and test those assumptions, get them right, get them wrong, change them, morph them, and sort of document the various experiments that you have here. I used to suggest kind of keeping some kind of record of the Post-it notes as you change them, so that you don't repeat experiments that you failed. But we now all are in the habit of sort of take a photo of the whiteboard, and I think that's good enough. Sort of take the camera phone picture of the whiteboard, file them away in Dropbox, and don't make a big you don't need to make a big production of the historical experiments. Sort of just take a picture of the whiteboard from time to time, and make sure you save those somewhere useful. And I think you'll be in good shape there. I mentioned once this thing is not baked, but once you have reasonable confidence about it, and you're going out to pitch investors, you're going to pitch partners, you're going to talk to other potential founders, you're going to hire key employees. Taking this thing and making it a little prettier, something like this. This is the one for Nespresso with some pictures associated with it, and using that as a cheat sheet to tell your business story has also been really helpful for me in ventures. To say, all right, I have on one page here. Here's my business story. I'm going to walk you through it. Here are the key parts. Here are the things that we're doing. Here's why I think we're going to win. Here are the things where we don't have answers yet. And that's another thing as you pitch a venture. Be open-minded about, what, these 6 questions on this page, we don't yet, this is a guess. This one's a hypothesis. This one is a semi-tested guess. Like I've taken this thing and I've got a little bit of evidence that they like this part of my business model. But these other 3, these are just my working assumptions right now, right? And if this one's wrong, I'm going to take that one off. I'm going to put this one on, and I'm going to change this thing. But this is that document, a wonderful way to tell a business's story from sort of end to end, and to not miss any parts of that story. Right? Another thing that we tend to, depending on your lens, if you're an operator, you think about, let me tell you about all the cost structure, let me tell you about all those things. If you're the developer, you talk all about the product. We built this thing and the algorithm for it is the best, and so on and so forth. This will force you to think about it in situ, sort of across the whole business and all the other interrelated piece parts that, business is the sum of these parts, not the individual pieces on the diagram. I encourage you to get the book. How many of you have this book, Business Model Generation? Only 1, 2? All right. More of you should get this book. It does a great job of telling you about this tool, but also as a reference manual for when we got questions about the key activities box. I'm stuck there. I don't know how to think about that. I can't. I've got 5 people in that box, and I think I only need 3, but I'm not sure which 2, are on the edge of importance there. A lot of very thoughtful questions, to ask yourself about your business model. To say, hey, am I thinking about this in a structured kind of way? Ash Maurya, I mentioned him earlier, sort of the customer factory idea that what your business is about is creating a happy customer. It's a factory that makes happy customers. And he has a book called Running Lean that takes a slight variation of this canvas, something called a lean canvas, that changes a few of those boxes, kind of angles them a little bit more to the startup kind of set of the question, because you can model a giant enterprise in a business model canvas. You can model a nonprofit in a business model canvas. Startups have a unique set of problems, and he's refined the canvas for those particular set of problems. And also given, to your question earlier about how do I know when I've got enough certainty about these assumptions on a business model. He's got a lot of great examples about, and they're never going to be exactly analogous to your business, but there's a lot of great case studies in there for, hey, in this multi-sided business, it's when you got to 15% penetration that it tipped, and when you got to 22% lifetime value, this is when it tipped, and so a lot of great case studies in there, and a very useful guide for that kind of stuff. I've always wanted to say this, sorry. And one more thing. This is new to this presentation. The guys who wrote the Business Model Canvas have a new book out. This is it. Bad Value Proposition Design, a guide to burning cash, communicating poorly, and spending your short life building stuff nobody wants. I encourage you to read it. Actually, that's the wrong one. Sorry, this is the one. Value Proposition Design, how to create products and services customers want. Getting started with value proposition design. So they have a new book called Value Proposition Design, which builds on the foundation of the Business Model Canvas and dives deeper into two areas that, particularly for startups, for all businesses these are important, but for startups, for new ventures, they are probably the two boxes that matter the most, which is getting that value proposition right and getting those initial customer segments right. It's those two boxes that matter the most for an entrepreneurial venture at the start of its journey. And so they've built two tools that dive deeper into those two boxes. Give you some additional tools and additional questions and additional sort of higher resolution views of the content of those three boxes. So in the customer segment area, it explicitly calls out what are the customer jobs to be done and makes you think about those and document those sort of specifically. What are the gains and pains that customer experiences, or that customer segment experiences with our product? And then on the flip side, what's the product and services? What are the things that we are doing that create that gain for the customer? What are the things that we are doing that relieve pain for the customer? Because those aren't necessarily the same things, and certain products actually bring with them, hey, you have to do this to get that. And so, there's sometimes pain required to get to the ultimate, to the particular benefit. Take gyms as an example. So far, nobody's invented a way to sort of make, to get you buff and so on without doing some work. And so there's pain associated with the gain on that model, and documenting those things as they interplay is worth doing. And so they have this new book out. I'm about halfway through, or I'd talk to you some more about it. I thought I would get the Kindle version. I thought was the fastest way to get it. Turns out the paperback came out first, and so I'm behind the curve a little bit in terms of reading that. But called Value Proposition Design, adds the Value Proposition Canvas to our toolkit, and next year, this time, roughly this time next year, hopefully I'll incorporate that into this talk, because I have an awful lot of time for the guys who developed this product. So that's the end of my slides and talk. And thank you very much for your attention and your time, and for your entrepreneurial energy, and that for being here today. And hopefully you found it useful, and answer any questions. Talk to you about anything that any questions I've raised, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
So I guess I'll ask a question about the slide since it's up. So on key activities, I'm interested that the device is not a key activity. So creating the activity and getting those patents is not, well, that's not a key activity, and I'm just wondering why that is. And how would that, so I thought of if you're developing technology, it seems doing research and developing that technology is a key activity, but that's not actually a key activity.
Well, I think in a business where ongoing technology development is part of its sustained success, I think that would belong there. I think in this case, they had an initial set of ideas that were input to the business as a key resource at the start of it, and there wasn't a whole lot of innovation in the capsule on an ongoing basis. If you were making software, you were making a drug or something else that it needed to continuously evolve, I think that might be there. In this case, I'd say it was an input condition, not an ongoing success condition. But I think there's room for debate about that for sure. Yeah?
Hi, thank you for your presentation. My question is actually related very specifically to this slide itself. And I was just wondering that why coffee growers are not listed under key partners.
They probably should be. I think that's a fair...
Would they be key partners?
I think so. I think debatable. I mean, I think there's room for argument about it, but I would put them on. If I had to do it over again. I think the negative argument would be that, given that it's in the packaging and so on, I don't buy. It's not like going to a roaster and sort of buying the particular bean or the particular terroir. Like there's sort of people who very passionate about coffee and would buy a particular bean from a particular region from a. In the Nespresso case, you sort of buy Nespresso, and Nespresso solves that for you. So the grower is important to them, but not important to me. As a customer, I think in this model, but I think largely I'd put them on.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, go.
This was very intuitive. Thank you very much for this. The one place I got a bit stuck was when you were talking about the curve of the line. When you get new customers in the revenue stream box down in the corner. I was never good at calculus. I tried my best, but could you talk a little bit about maybe a resource you could point us to for those of us who, our numeracy is maybe not very great, and how we could think about how the behavior of acquiring new customers would change the shape of the curve and that revenue function? Cool.
So I'm going to do a terrible job of sort of drawing a picture in the air, but hopefully it will give you a little bit of context, and then I'll point you to some resources. We have some very good ones on the Mars website for this kind of process. But what I care about as a startup, almost every business that you start, at least every high growth business, and making that distinction. The shape of the curve sort of looks like this. So, you start here, you're neutral, right? And then we dig a hole, right? We spend money, and then you come up the other side, right? And hopefully this matters, and that. But the speed at which once you've stopped digging deeper, like when you begin to turn up, it's not actually the size of the money particularly. It's the increase in the velocity of how fast you go up that is the most essential thing certainly in venture-funded business. If you're going to pitch VCs or sort of other people for money, they may not always phrase the question that way, but it's the slope of the change over time of that curve that matters to them. So the best way that I know how to model that, there are great functions in Excel for that, lots of templates for different kinds of businesses. You can almost always find one that's close enough as a first approximation for what you're doing. We have them on the Mars DD website under business model, I think is sort of where you'd find them. We can maybe in the blog post make sure we link to them particularly today. And then we also run part of our Entrepreneurs Toolkit workshops. One of the workshops is specifically on financial modeling, and they'll spend a day with you in deep dive on this topic, and worth doing. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Thank you very much.
Cool.
Yes.
Cheers.
Yeah, in your personal experience, what's been the best way to narrow down your customer segment so you're not leaving out too many people, but you feel like you have your core group?
Well, so I mean, I think that varies a ton by what kind of what the business is, but in general, I think it's important that they be addressable. And what I mean by addressable for them is that you can, however you define them, that it's narrow enough that you can then go out and efficiently find them, right? And so depending on what the business is and what marketing channels or distribution channels are available to you, narrowing them down to the point where I can now go out and find enough of them to test whether this is a good idea, right? Is to me the input condition. How many people that is to be successful, to say, hey, yeah, it checks the box, is unfortunately one that I don't know how to model. It is essentially an instinct question. What level do I and my other partners feel that we've got enough certainty to make the next, to turn over the next card, to do the next thing.
But you usually find that it takes away from your segment if you pick, 3 potential archetypes.
I think it's okay to define multiple ones, and in fact, one of the things that Canvas is good for is saying, hey, if I change the segment, what else changes relatively easily? You can say, hey, if we go from here to, if we change the segment from this to this, what else to change to the left of it, and worth, doing as a thought experiment. In terms of actually going out into the world and, testing my Canvas to say whether it's a good thing, I think having 6 of them isn't a negative as long as you test them in series rather than in parallel. Right? Test the ideas one at a time. Having 12 ideas is okay as long as you don't let the 11 distract you from testing the one. Right?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah? Please.
Thank you very much for the talk. I actually was introduced to this at a business competition that I participated because we had limited time to create it, so that's what they gave us. So thank you for that.
A progressive business plan competition.
No, at the end we had to make a business model, but we started with that.
You started with this and then Canvas. You turned it into...
And that's actually my question. Have you found that this is great and it's agile and you can, like you said, it's open to change and you can change this a lot easier than you would a business plan. However, what I found was that people still want a business plan. So do you use this as, have you ever had a situation where an investor is okay with this as your business plan, and if you go and show them, hey, this is what I have for the company, is that sufficient, or is the business plan not eradicated by this, it's just supplemented?
So venture investors, generally, when they say they want to see your business plan, what they really mean is they want to see that spreadsheet, right? You know what I mean? They ask you for the business plan, but what they want is the spreadsheet and enough knowledge about the business to be able to plug their own assumptions in and say, hey, what happens to the slope of the curve when I change this and that, right? If you're going to a bank to borrow money, or you're going to the BDC, or so on and so forth, yes, you're going to have to write a business plan. There is no escape from that, and certain sources of funding will insist. This makes a great table of contents for said business plan, and I'd write it the day before they make you give it to them. You know what I mean? Write the business plan just in time for whatever that financing event is, so that you don't find it stifling your ability to think on your feet about these things, right? Someday, maybe, this will be universally accepted in lieu of the business plan, but no, last time I was at a bank asking for money, they still wanted one of these.
Thanks, thank you.
Yeah, no worries, cheers.
All right, we are out of time. Thank you so much, Mark. Will you be around for questions
Yeah, absolutely.
after?
Yeah, I'll
All right,
stick around
thank
for
you
other
everyone for
questions. Thank
coming.
you.
Have a good evening.